Watch it, but it sounds funny.
Hey, just as a heads up, this was originally going to be a much longer project, but I've been in and out of hospital a lot over the last week or so, so please think of this video as a kind of introduction to this topic to be followed up in another part in a few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the relaxation room. Going to be popping into it occasionally throughout this video. I'm going to be covering a lot of sensitive topics in this one that are currently on screen there. For obvious reasons, I didn't really feel like doing a silly mid-roll sponsor transition with this one. But I did want to mention that this video will be talking extensively about The Last of Us, which is also a show available on HBO Max, which is a service that thinks it's too good to be available in most of the world outside of the US. If you would like to access it, I would recommend using a VPN, and specifically Surfshark. Surfshark is a virtual private network service that helps you connect to various servers all over the globe. This is useful for online security and privacy, additional protection while using public Wi-Fi, and also accessing content that might only be available in certain countries, which is what I use it for constantly because I live inside of Dark Souls. It's also good for getting around government censorship, which could be useful if this video happens to be blocked in any countries for any reasons, with several extra features like a clean web function to help block ads, malware, trackers, and phishing attempts, and a bypasser to help you customize which apps and websites you want to have covered on the service. Surfshark is an excellent VPN and also one of the most affordable options. And if you go to surfshark.com/jsaint or use the code JSaint at checkout, you can get 4 extra months of the service. Thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and thank you.
Thank you.
Just finished my replay of The Cokes of Snafusus Part 5. I actually think it was pretty underrated. Did you read the Vice article? 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 In July of 2020, writer Emanuel Myberg put out an article on Vice titled "The Not So Hidden Israeli Politics of The Last of Us Part 2." And for the past 3 years, I've been linked to that article every single time I mention The Last of Us. In it, he highlights a core theme explored in the story that creative director Neil Druckmann and the team at developer Naughty Dog have been extremely subtle about. Did you know The Last of Us 2 was about cycles of violence?
I became really intrigued with the idea of the cycle of violence. That feeds right back in that idea of that cycle of violence. You know, the cycle of violence. Cycle of violence. Endless cycle of violence.
Neil walked me down the story, and he was like, this cycle of violence.
Acts of violence that then would beget more acts of violence.
Wow.
It's almost never satisfying. It never brings the person you love back. And despite you thinking it's going to bring some closure, it doesn't. We just need more empathy. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could create an experience that lets you safely explore those feelings?
Specifically, a cycle of violence is explored by 2 key narratives woven together in the story. One, a revenge plot between 2 characters, and one, an ongoing back and forth conflict between 2 armies wrestling for control of a post-apocalyptic Seattle. Sorry, I was trying to think of a good joke about Seattle. When I went there were not enough public restrooms.
Rather than step back, cooperate, and seek truth and reconciliation, the Wolves and Scars keep seeking revenge for past grievances in a cycle of violence that eventually ends them both in literal fires sparked by hate. The game's message seems to be, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind.
And yeah, this message in the story is about as blunt as the writers of the game directly stating it. As Myberg points out, there is literally a part of the game where, as an act of revenge, one of the characters has their eye shot out. Throughout the story, revenge is consistently shown as foolish and destructive, both obviously to the person receiving it, but also the person inflicting it. Death and death and death and loneliness and misery, and it is only on these few occasions of a character demonstrating mercy that we see any possible glimmer of hope. Now clearly, you can't really tie this type of story to any specific modern politics. The cycle of violence and revenge as a storytelling idea is pretty old. And I don't just mean like Shakespeare old, although Shakespeare definitely used that trope in a lot of his work. Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, King Lear, Titus Andronicus, all of these stories are driven by acts of violence that spin off into more violence, and most of the time everyone ends up dead. Much older religious and mythological stories use this trope. The story of Saturn, which I mentioned in my last video, is entirely built on a god assuring his own destruction through his own violent acts. Acts which were ironically meant to protect Saturn from that fate. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known stories, centers around a feud between a violent, oppressive king and a group of enraged gods, leading to the death of his BFF Vegeta boyfriend. Only at the end of the story is Gilgamesh's violent nature quelled and he resigns himself to a quieter, humble life. Kind of like another story. This leaves us with a question. What does this have to do with Israel? Is this just a case of people taking current controversial political topics and projecting it onto the themes of a much more universal story? Or even just extrapolating that because the lead writer of the game is from Israel, that therefore means everything he writes necessarily has to be about Israel? To answer this question, I want to rewind back to the initial hype cycle leading up to The Last of Us 2's release.
Who's this woman? Who is this faction? Like, what's going on?
Who the fuck has time to hang someone?
This was the second trailer released for the game and the first one to give a clearer sense of what it was about. Notably, not just about Joel and Ellie, the protagonists of the previous entry in the series from whose perspectives everything that happened in that story was observed from. Fans pretty much immediately started speculating this mysterious new character must therefore have some direct connection to Joel and Ellie. And I remember at the time the big theory people landed on was that this was going to turn out to be Ellie's mom, something Druckmann and his team directly fed into.
The same number of letters as Anna, Ellie's mom's name, will get people to think this is Ellie's mom.
And it would make some sense to go in this direction. Much of the first game centered around Ellie's miraculous immunity from the spores that had infected most of the planet, and this would be an opportunity to provide some backstory to that immunity. It just so happens that theory was completely wrong. What the trailer actually depicts is a soldier named Abby being captured by members of an unknown religious cult. At least that's what we can assume based on their references to the soldier's sins and their search to root out an apostate of their faith. The soldier is teased with mutilation and strung up to be lynched before being narrowly saved, presumably by the same people the cult was looking for, during which members of the cult are summarily executed. With hindsight, it's actually pretty telling that this was the scene the game was sold with, and if you know what I'm talking about, you know where I'm going with this. See, Druckmann actually had a very specific idea of what inspired him with this story.
And then they cheered afterward. Druckmann, who grew up in Israel, recalls. It was the cheering that was really chilling to me. In my mind, I thought, oh man, if I could just push a button and kill all these people that committed this horrible act, I would make them feel the same pain that they inflicted on these people.
In a 2020 interview with the Washington Post, Druckmann, who'd spent much of his childhood in Tel Aviv, outlined his reaction to an infamous 2000 lynching in Ramallah, an occupied West Bank territory, specifically the killing of 2 Israeli soldiers to the gleeful celebration of a Palestinian crowd. He highlights 2 feelings. First, disgust at the crowd and an immediate wish that he could have pushed a button to instantly kill them all as vengeance, and then later disgust at himself for having had that reaction. In his own words, as much as the first Last of Us was born out of his love for his child, The Last of Us 2 would be an exploration of the hate he felt towards those Palestinians. So yeah, I guess I can see how some people thought maybe this game was about Israel. So here we have a story about cycles of violence, 2 warring factions, neither of which is...
So thankfully, because I've been able to do more history research and like understand more about the world than I had previously, one thing I will say that a lot of people don't know is when it comes to cycles of violence, this stuff actually has happened before outside of Israel-Palestine. Now, I know a lot of people might think that like 2 sides hating each other and killing each other and stuff and getting into a cycle of violence is only Israel-Palestine, but that's a theme that arguably has been in at least 3 or 4 other major conflicts in human history. But
is willing to let go of their grudge against the other. One is presented as a drab, modern, militaristic group of coldly pragmatic soldiers securing their territory, while one is presented as a backwards, bloodthirsty, primitive, intolerant religious group who mutilate themselves and their enemies. I wonder which one is meant to be Palestine. Now, I could end this video here by saying you can just go read Myberg's article and come to your own conclusions. But look, buddy, I have a YouTube channel here, and I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually going to be a father. And to be honest, I've been wanting to talk about Zionism and also about The Last of Us for quite a long time. And I think it also makes sense to explore both of those things in their full context to better understand how they really link together. So given the release of the 2nd season of The Last of Us show and Israel, I'd like to talk to you all about Zionism and The Last of Us. So, first let's talk about The Last of Us.
Oh my God.
Dude.
It's weed.
Dude. Yeah, dude. Oh my God. Yeah, dude. Game of the year, dude.
I'm curious how he can have a negative spin on this, because by the end of this game, doesn't it say that vengeance doesn't give anything good anyway, and that we should all just stop killing each other? Oh, but the position for a lot of these people is that all Israelis and Jews should just be killed. So that's the bad thing. So in his mind, he wanted to see Abby murder Ellie in the end, and that would have been the good ending, I guess. Okay.
Game of the year, dude. Can I smoke the weed, dude?
The funny thing is, I played The Last of Us Part 2 on release and had originally planned to make a video about it when it came out. There was also going to talk about politics. Not least politics.
You can see Ellie used to be a bit of a more cute girl, and now in the new game, she's looking more angry, more masculine, more male. Eventually, we're going to get to one of our famous, most hated SJWs of all time. Anita Sarkeesian appears to play a role in this.
There's a question I want you to think about as we go through this video. Is it always better to keep things simple? The Last of Us has always been a controversial series, although I'd argue the first and second one were controversial for kind of different reasons. The first game, for the most part, kept things simple. It was very self-consciously basically a HBO drama miniseries long before it was actually a HBO drama miniseries. It is a serious, gritty, grounded story, and they want you to know that so bad that the title of the making of documentary is also grounded. Grounded. There's a good chance you've already seen a story about a gruff older man trying to navigate an apocalypse. There's a chance you've already seen one about a man escorting other survivors to the possibility of salvation. There's a chance you've already seen one where specifically the man is escorting a child, and there's a chance you've already seen one where specifically the man is escorting a child who may also hold the key to a special cure. If you have also noticed The Last of Us is somewhat derivative, ooh, what a special boy you are. Now, don't get me wrong, I also wish they just stuck with the original concept of a Jack and Daxter sequel. I don't see what's so unapproachable about a story about an elf and his talking weasel traveling through time to a dystopian future so they can use special cosmic energy to fight fascism while also battling an invading alien army, and also there's some evil robots who are fascist and alien.
You're in for a big surprise. The Dark Makers don't play nicely with others. Just ask the metalheads.
So true. Those who hunt dinosaurs. Maybe this should just be a Yes album. I think it's always been clear it wasn't a mistake for The Last of Us. Mostly follows a very recognizable narrative structure. It's, again, approachable, especially to people who don't often play games. And that extends to every aspect of the design. The game's focus is clearly on immaculately presented worlds and characters with impressive art, sound, animation, and performances, while the gameplay is kept relatively simple and, again, focused on cinematic moments. Some people find this fluid and natural, while some people think it's basically a game that's vaguely ashamed of being a game and thinks it's better than everyone else because it's like, dude, what if the guys in the computer are like real human beings? There's always been, to an extent, a popular idea that video games are toys for children, or at the very least, an inherently lowbrow form of art if it's even considered art. And as a result, it's never quite sat well with some people that The Last of Us has been so widely elevated for basically doing as much as it can to avoid acknowledging as a video game. Like it's vaguely ashamed of its own medium. I've always found that take somewhat cynical. Part of what I love about games is that they can merge so many different elements from other mediums. Is it slightly cringe that so much more money and attention is given to games that are vaguely trying to be movies? Sure. Does it feel slightly patronizing when the game stops every 30 minutes to give me a zombie encounter so my little gamer brain doesn't wither away and die? A bit. Is it really pretentious that writers keep refusing to call their zombies zombies? Yes, it is. Please stop doing this. You already wrote zombies in. You can't just trick us at the last second by calling them the deady, walky, frowny men. But it works. And even if it feels derivative, I think their first story was well executed. Joel and Ellie perfectly reflect on each other in ways that aren't immediately apparent. This is not Joel's world. That world is gone. That future he had is gone. And Ellie is just a reminder of that lost innocence that went with it. At the same time, Ellie was born into this world. She's been robbed of that past Joel used to enjoy. A father she didn't get to have. But she does get to have him. And he gets to have her if the two are willing to let go of their significant personal emotional baggage.
I've lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for.
The way they do feels so gradual that I really struggle not to get invested in it. It's ironically far better executed here than in the show adaptation the game eventually got. But all this has to be shrunk down to a 9-episode season where 3 episodes lack one or both lead characters and most of the others dedicate huge chunks of time to side character B-plots. Who do we prioritize? Who are we willing to family who've already committed to lives devoted to protect? Later, Ellie encounters a group of starving survivors whose leaders have turned to cannibalism to maintain peace and order. And you can see in both Joel and Ellie a struggle to be vulnerable enough to recognize how strongly they feel about each other. I was always really struck by the last section of the game leading up to Joel handing Ellie over to the Fireflies. This weird role reversal moment where Joel has finally opened up and just starts chatting away about things to do with Ellie when all this is over, wanting to teach her how to play a guitar, even opening up somewhat about losing his first child, Sarah.
After you lost Sarah, you know.
Prepared for this new daughter role Joel now clearly has lined up for her. In the end, Joel is forced to make a decision between Ellie and a cure that could be the potential salvation of the human race. He chooses Ellie. She is his us. Again, it's a fairly straightforward story presented in an easily approachable cinematic way, and some people connected with it and some people didn't. Most of that criticism was more about general frustrations with the direction of the game industry, and not as much controversy around the story of the game itself. This was not the case with The Last of Us Part 2.
I don't give a fuck. I'll do the whole thing on my own.
Dumbass.
Hey, welcome back to the relaxation room. It'll be good for us to spend a few moments in here before we move on. I just want to say that whether or not you like a video game, I think you're a cool guy, because you made it this far in the video, and that is an accomplishment.
Oh, thank you.
And you know, I'd like to say I've mellowed out about the...
What even are cold sores just sleeper cell herpes? Sleeper cell herpes are just herpes that live in your body that don't do anything because they're chilling in your spine nerve cells or something. Cold sores are a herpes outbreak. They're not chilling. They're out. Announcing themselves to the world.
The outrage around The Last of Us 2.
It is not HSV1 versus HSV2. Both of those can infect either mouth or genitals, and both can result in cold sores.
In the 5 years since it came out. And you know, I'm a chill guy now, and I get where people are coming from. No. So as Druckmann explained, The Last of Us Parts 1 and
No! Oh, we're not cool. Fuck.
2 are kind of mirrors of each other. The first game is an exploration of love, and the second an exploration of hate. Tying it together thematically, if the first Last of Us was mostly focused on the process of learning to love and trust another person, the act of bringing someone into our hearts and the consequences of that, The Last of Us 2 is about losing that, about what happens when the people we love are taken from us, when The Last of Us is gone. A lot of people did not like this.
10 hours of Abby? 10?
pregnant.
Jesus Christ.
Are you fucking kidding right now? No, fuck Abby, I don't want to play this. This is exactly as I thought it was. Fuck this.
The Last of Us Part 2 is the last Jedi of gaming.
I remember in the months of online arguments about how The Last of Us 2 betrayed the original story, I saw this video essay by The Closer Look that a lot of people recommended, where he not only explains some of the issues people had, but even goes as far as to present a complete rewrite of the story in a way that would better please fans. And many fans who hated the second game story did like the rewrite. It's why I was sent the video. I feel like breaking down this rewrite in contrast to the second game is probably a more fun way to talk about The Last of Us 2 than just a long dry summary next to some angry tweets. So we're going to do that. So to briefly catch up, in the actual game, Joel dies abruptly in the first few hours, spoiling the opportunity to mend the relationship between himself and Ellie following his decision at the end of the first game. His killer is Abby, motivated by Joel's own brutal murder of her dad and the complete massacre of the group she was a part of. Ellie's quest for revenge leads her to deliberately killing some of Abby's friends while accidentally killing others, including Abby's on-off lover Owen and his pregnant partner Mel. Abby inflicts her own revenge, killing Ellie's friend Jesse and maiming Joel's brother Tommy. And when she spares Ellie, Ellie still cannot let it go. It is only finally, after tracking Abby down one last time, moments away from drowning her and finally ending this feud, that Ellie remembers that last interaction she had with Joel before his death. The moment we later learn that she tells him even though she's not sure she can forgive him, she wants to try. Ellie for a moment allows herself to think of Abby the way she thought of Joel. She lets Abby in. She lets Abby live. They are left bloodied and scarred, but they both walk away. It's over.
Ellie lets her walk free. You let Joel's killer walk free. This is terrible storytelling. To not even decide to pay it off, you let his killer walk free.
Well, it sounds like that was kind of the whole fucking point of the game. No.
I'm not playing the game. Well, what the fuck was the point in this then?
So in the close...
Okay.
Phillips rewrite, Joel doesn't actually die. Instead, Abby just shoots his leg and kidnaps Ellie's girlfriend Dina, thinking she's Ellie, because it turns out somehow Fedra returned. Fedra being the fascist military group that was basically falling apart in the last game.
They're led by a man we'll call General...
Wait, what?
So in the Closer Looks rewrite, Joel doesn't actually die. Instead, Abby just shoots his
Closer Looks rewrite. Is that the guy who was doing the review?
leg and kidnaps Ellie's girlfriend Dina, thinking she's Ellie, because it turns out somehow Fedra returned. Fedra being the fascist military group that was basically falling apart in the last game.
They're led by a man we'll call General Redgrave, someone who before the infection was actually a general in the US Army and served in Iraq. What's really terrifying about this guy is he doesn't give monologues, he doesn't have an ego, he won't order people tortured just for the fun. He is purely tactical, logical, and is a ruthlessly brilliant commander.
But now they have helicopters and zombie death squads, and they even have a cure, but it's like a shitty diet cure that only really works if you're already infected, and if you get infected again, you need to use it again, which, I mean, it definitely sounds like a headache. So that's actually the reason Abby was tracking down Joel and Ellie, to try and get a better cure to undermine Fedra, not for any kind of personal reason.
That's why Abby and her crew went to Jackson, because if they can use Ellie to find a way to create a permanent...
This is like a fan rewrite, I guess, right? Okay.
Like one where you take a single shot and that's it, you're immune from the cordyceps forever, it will break General Redgrave's grip and all the other local factions as his cure, which is what's giving him all of his influence, will suddenly be worthless. Doesn't this version of Abby sound so much more compelling as a character compared to the one we got?
Ellie goes after Dina and crosses paths with Abby, who deliberately gets Dina infected so Ellie is forced to join forces with her and help make the cure to save America from Fedra domination. Along the way, Ellie has a phone, so she can occasionally call Joel and he can give her advice, and they actually get to resolve a lot of their personal issues.
She tells Joel everything, that she's been blackmailed, that Dina's been infected, and Ellie's never felt more alone and afraid in all her life. And Joel consoles her without skipping a beat, telling her what to do, to not trust Abby because people like her always go back on their word, to remember all the lessons he taught her, and to leave these people and their politics alone and come home with Dina the first second she can. And Ellie finally asks, after all this time, she finally asks how he's doing.
It's up to the point where Abby betrays Ellie, because it turns out they actually still can't make the cure without killing her. Luckily, Joel shows up with a wooden leg and rescues her. So then they team up to save Dina and get their revenge on Abby, and just as Ellie does save Dina, Abby shows up and almost kills her. And then Joel rescues her again. So the twist is that right as Joel and Ellie's relationship seems to be mended, Dina gives Ellie the diet cure to take away her immunity, and then frames Joel for it. So Ellie ditches Joel, and Joel decides to go kill Abby, which I guess is just a way to keep some semblance of the revenge story so this still vaguely feels like the same game. Anyway, Ellie figures out Dina was lying, and Joel does kill Abby, but he's also mortally wounded. And as the game closes out, Ellie finds Joel just in time for one final heartfelt conversation, presumably a few feet away from Abby's floating corpse.
Ellie runs towards him and immediately tries to stop the bleeding, begging for him to hold on. She says it was Dina who did it, and she begs for his forgiveness. Joel forgives her instantly, and he makes her promise to be strong, to look after the people at Jackson, because he can't anymore. He tells her to remember all of the lessons that he taught her, and she promises to. That's my girl, he says weakly.
Joel gets to tell Ellie to remember all of his lessons, and Ellie gets to apologize for all the terrible things she said.
What is the point of going through this other guy's whole fan rewrite? Or I don't understand. It sounds like, I mean, maybe that could have been a decent game, but it's like a totally different... The message would be totally different. It'd be like rewriting Shakespeare where Romeo and Juliet end up together happily ever after. I mean, I like, you could write it, I guess, but it's just, obviously it would be creating a whole different thing, no?
To him, and just as he passes away, Ellie calls him Dad. We close out on a teaser of the Fedra general preparing to invade America, and that's what The Last of Us Part 3 would be.
Then General Redgrave looking at the remnants of the battle and saying something like, "Let's get to work."
Druckmann recently confirmed that the Fireflies could have found the cure. At the end of The Last of Us 1? At the end of The Last of Us 1, thematically, for the game to make sense, of course, killing Abby should have had at least some percentage chance of saving humanity. Otherwise, there's no moral ambiguity or tough call for Joel to make. He's just the good guy doing the right thing, and the other guys were the bad guys doing the wrong thing. There had to have been some chance. Otherwise, it completely collapses the entire moral dimension of the end of the game. You mean Ellie? What did I say?
I really respect that.
Oh, Ellie, not Abby.
Closer look, took the time to not just have a knee-jerk fuck this reaction to a story he disliked, but to actually think through why he disliked it and what he would have done differently. I also want to underline that, I have no personal beef with the closer look, and I generally believe that there's no such thing as a bad story, just bad execution. With that said, I fucking hate this. So now instead of a story about two characters with deeply personal motivations, tragically entangled as each sees the other as the root of their problems, descending into the worst versions of themselves as each refuses to understand or recognize the humanity of the other, Ellie and Abby are effectively set dressing for a story about the big bad evil empire showing up and forcing them to join forces. Until at the last second, Joel shows up to wrap up the conflict for an emotional climax that amounts to, I love you, Joel. We all love you, Joel. Just double checking nobody playing has to struggle with any possible unresolved emotions. Get hyped for War for the Planet of The Last of Us.
And then at the end of this full exploration of their relationship, when they finally resolve their angst and Ellie's forgiven him, then Joel dies. Almost nobody would have had a problem with that. This is why people pulling out the argument of, oh, you're just annoyed because they killed a character you love, doesn't hold much water.
I think my problem is rooted in how the closer look is like possible unresolved emotions. Get hyped for War for the Planet of The Last of Us.
And then at the end of this full exploration of their relationship, when they finally resolve their angst and Ellie's forgiven him, then Joel dies. Almost nobody would have had a problem with that. This is why people pulling out the argument of, oh, you're just annoyed because they killed a character you love, doesn't hold much water.
I think my problem is rooted in how the closer look characterizes the first game as a heartwarming story.
How to Rewrite a Tragedy, a prologue to Zionism in The Last of Us. I thought that this 48-minute video was going to be about the Zionist stuff or whatever, but we got like a 7-minute review of The Last of Us. Now we're getting a full review of not only The Last of Us 2, but a fan rewrite of The Last of Us 2. What is this video?
Story about an old man learning to love again.
The first game is all about Joel, the cynical old man, meeting Ellie, the naive, optimistic girl, and the story follows them both as they fall in love, as they grow to trust each other, and both of them improve the other.
LSF thread on your anti-sports betting take. Good. I hate sports, and I hope they're mad at me. And I hope they hate it.
That's what the first game was all about, this heartwarming tale of paternal love. But if The Last of Us 1 wasn't about that, and was instead about a miserable man struggling...
It's always so weird to me when the anti-sports sports ball crowd have to turn it into a homophobic thing. What?
Surviving the apocalypse, meeting a girl and then dragging her down to his level, and then making her equally as depraved a person as him. If the first game were far darker and far bleaker than what we got, the response to the second one would have been immeasurably more positive.
So, okay, to some extent, it was the first thing. But it was also definitely the second thing.
Goddamn years and was instead about a miserable man struggling to survive in the apocalypse, meeting a girl and then dragging her down to his level, and then making her equally as depraved a person as him. If the first game were far darker and far bleaker than what we got, the response to the second one would have been immeasurably more positive.
So, okay, to some extent, it was the first thing. But it was also definitely the second thing.
Those goddamn years I took care of us. Took care? That's what you call it? I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
Told you what you wanted. I ain't telling you shit.
That's all right. I believe it.
No, wait!
In fact, the second thing defined the entire last act of the original game and is referenced constantly throughout the second. When Ellie tortures one of Abby's friends for information, she is emulating Joel in the first game. When Ellie tries to get Owen and Mel to cross-check a location on a map, she is emulating Joel in the first game. So much of the second game revolves around Ellie's resentment towards Joel, as explored by the pain she goes through when she tries to do for Joel what she knows he would have done for her. That's the whole thing. And in fairness, I feel like the show also flubs this pretty hard with this weird obsession Craig Mazin has with Ellie being some secret sadist who craves torture and murder.
Because when she's in that moment and she's got his arm and he's tapping out, she's somewhere else. Ellie is not like Joel. Joel builds. Ellie doesn't build stuff. She doesn't do construction. But Ellie can do violence.
Watch this scene and tell me Ellie is in any way
Wait, what was that interview from or about?
Enjoying what she's doing.
I'm here to talk.
Booba. Wait, is she underage in this? Never mind. I have no idea how it is. Oh, it's a video game.
I don't want to emphasize, I mean the creative team behind the show.
Season 2 of the show.
When I criticize this. Bella Ramsey has gotten such absurd out of proportion flack despite already demonstrating their talent with their performance as Ellie in the first season. The point is, Ellie cares for Joel just as players most likely do, but that doesn't prevent her from recognizing he was often a cruel and callous person who was extremely quick to decide whose lives had value and whose didn't. This does not make Joel a fundamentally evil person. And clearly, nobody, including the developers, including Neil Druckmann, thought of Joel that way, because the ending of the game is a flashback about Ellie wanting to forgive him. In fact, Joel ultimately dies because he is willing to put himself in danger to help save the lives of strangers, something he never would have done without Ellie's influence. It's not hard to see why you feel particularly inclined to save Abby, another young woman of a similar age to Ellie with quite a few similar surface characteristics. The tragedy isn't that Joel is unable to change his nature, but that letting his guard down makes him vulnerable to people who are as brutal and merciless as he used to be.
Joel is not that dumb. Joel is very smart. Joel is intelligent. And you made him out to be an idiot.
That's Abby's role in the story, to be a reflection both on how Joel used to think and what Ellie will become if she follows that same path, which is why it's so devastating to see Ellie go down that path anyway, and why it's cathartic to see both of them finally choose a different option. Throughout this video, the closer look makes several references to making characters more compelling, and I'm really fascinated how he is defining compelling, because I would say a compelling character is one whose personality and behaviors are explored to the extent that we see extremes, both of their best aspects and their worst, and how maybe even sometimes those two are tragically linked. This is part of what complicates Ellie's relationship with Joel. His behaviors didn't come from some cliche, sadistic, dark passenger. They came from his desire to protect people. This is the point. The things we often value most in people, love and empathy and loyalty, can often lead us to doing truly depraved things out of those feelings of obligation. I almost took an AI sponsorship, which is basically as bad as setting a man on fire. I guess being compelling here just means having obnoxious traits that make characters memorable while having no meaningful impact on the story or its message.
She gives Kyle a boost over a ledge, but then he doesn't lift her up and says that she'll have to find her own way round. Ellie sees a badass looking gun.
I can't believe I got baited into watching this whole fucking thing. I thought this was gonna be all about Zionism. What? This has nothing to do with it. Did I just...
And we get the player really excited about getting this and playing with it, and they have to do a puzzle to access it. And then once the player completes the puzzle and goes to claim it, Kyle beats them to it, and then he claims it for himself. And this really pisses the player off. And also, they constantly bicker about who should be the one who rides the horse. All of a sudden, Kyle is a far more compelling supporting character.
What if Jesse was Dina's annoying brother who hated Ellie but then dies trying to save her? That's an arc. What if Dina, who spends the entire game being a damsel in distress, decides she wants to completely destroy Ellie's relationship with Joel because it's compelling?
Oh, wait. Is he saying that this video of his is a prologue to Zionism and The Last of Us? So he's making this video and then there will be more videos to come? Shouldn't like a prologue be the first two were like a prologue? How to rewrite a tragedy and Zionism and The Last of Us? Is that what this is? Or...
And I really do not get how Abby is made more compelling by completely erasing all of her relationships, so that instead her entire plot is built around the most generic, literal, objectively evil one. Killed.
So Ellie grabs a pen and paper, gives it to the woman, she scribbles something down, and Ellie looks at the paper to see the words, "Kill me." God, I am so messed up as a human being. Like, I am not right in the head, but that would be bloody horrendous and bloody lovely at the same time.
You gamers are just too stupid to understand this very high IQ game. I'm so sick of this shit, man. Abby is not morally grey. She's comically fucking evil. Caring about Lev does not make up for the shit she's done. Not even close. Morally grey? Lol. Both Abby and Ellie are fucking homicidal psychopaths who slaughter men and women across Seattle and beyond. What is morally grey about that? Furthermore,
I never played The Last of Us 2. Wasn't Abby's dad like the surgeon in the game that Joel killed or whatever? Or am I making that up?
Or why would you want to empathize? Jack Saint is an idiot. Who is this Can you stop being a contrarian because the game was written by someone you agree with politically for one goddamn minute? If they can't be heroic, they aren't morally grey, they're just villains. Are you really this stupid? I got a lot of shit online for the frustrations I had about the outrage around The Last of Us 2. It made me feel at the time like maybe games are just toys for instant gratification. Because usually when I listen to a sad song or watch a sad scene in a movie, I don't need to explain that sometimes art that is trying to entertain you will also intentionally make you feel negative emotions. I don't think Titanic would be improved if I asked the AI to rewrite a version of it where Jack can actually fit on the door. This is incidentally where I would put my AI sponsorship, if I had one. But in retrospect, I do think that is dismissive. I get how frustrating it is when you're trying to explain you don't like something, not because it made you feel bad, but because of the way it was executed. Not long ago I made a video about Smile where I kept trying to explain my issues with that movie weren't just about it making me feel negative emotions, but the context of what the story was using those feelings to express. And I don't doubt there are plenty of people who feel that way about The Last of Us 2. I've also had issues with The Last of Us 2 that I will be talking about. And if it was just that Joel was your comfort character and his death made you feel too miserable to want to continue that story, that's also completely fine. Everyone knows I'm a cuck. None of this is to say The Last of Us 2 is a perfect game. I gave it a 6. What I didn't like about it was partly how stretched out large chunks of it felt to satisfy expectations of like a Last of Us experience. The pacing, in my opinion, was kind of atrocious, with a lot of sudden stops in narrative tension and momentum for obligatory generic stealth action gameplay. But underneath that, I always felt there was a deeper issue with the philosophy behind these games. Something that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Not about the game being too dark or serious or political, but what I imagines a dark, serious, political game is. In 2009, it was announced the tactical shooter would be released based on a battle that took place during the Iraq War from the perspective of US troops. 6 days in Fallujah. The game immediately became highly controversial, with various arguments why its development was in bad taste. That the conflict was too recent, they would be biased towards a pro-American agenda, they would lack the ability to provide necessary context to the situation when limited to the format of action shooter gameplay. This, I feel, was the basic anxiety underlying this. That given how obviously political a game like this would be, lacking the emotional distance we might have to older conflicts like the First and Second World Wars that had frequently been the basis of games, a shooter was not equipped to tackle this. On its face, I disagree that a game couldn't be used to portray a real, deeply sensitive or controversial topic. Obligatory Spec Ops The Line reference. I do think some people had a knee-jerk reaction to seeing a game that had a surface-level similarity to Call of Duty, a franchise that in fairness has repeatedly collaborated directly with the US military and has historically not been especially sensitive to the ways it depicts military conflict. This comes back to what I was talking about before, the perception of games as toys for the gratification of an audience. How could people be expected to play a game based on a real-life conflict from a real-life war that was premised on an illegal invasion of a country and the commitment of repeated, well-documented war crimes, and not just come away thinking, I just got an epic headshot? Like, people say epic a lot in 2009, I'm just being historically accurate. The developer's initial statement seemed very clear their desire to depoliticize an obviously political event, something that just feels patently ridiculous when the basis of your game is US Marines asking you to retell an event from their point of view to better understand their perspective.
A recreation of the actual events, the actual stories of the Marines that fought in Fallujah. Our role is to tell the true stories of what happened in Fallujah, as told to us by the people who are actually there.
It reminded me of the recent movie Warfare, which also depicted a real battle during the Iraq War. To the dehumanizing act me back to thinking about The Last of Us and its relationship to politics. Again, I'm not of the opinion that games can't be used to address serious topics. Clearly in The Last of Us PCs with names and relationships to make the player feel the weight of this story as it unfolds. And some players, again, resisted this, who on a few occasions tried to hold an enemy hostage or force them to flee or surrender without having to kill with your actions. The guilt is Ellie's. For all these reasons, in development and execution, in thematic and narrative intent, I think The Last of Us, and especially its sequel, wants to make real statements about real moral issues, tell us anything about Zionism. Okay, so you can see we're back in the realization room here, and that means we have to chill. So this may be abrupt, but I may have scheduled these videos without really thinking about...
This is a prologue video. I hate you, and I hate whoever linked this to me. Fuck all of you. And fuck this waste of time. Okay. Back to the boring stuff. Prepare to be tortured. Wait, we'll watch this quick thing first. This was apparently Joe Rogan's first talk with Peter Hotez. Was this really the same talk he was referencing with Huberman from 6 years ago? Or was there a more recent talk?
A lot of people that are steadfast in their resistance to vaccines, they also believe in a lot of other questionable things.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like these things get lumped into these groups of things that they don't trust the government about.
Right. Yeah, I think that's part.
Oh my! I can't believe Joe Rogan. I can't believe he morphed so much. It's unbelievable.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah. That's what sucks about having a sketchy government.
Which was well, it was interesting. So, I said, we need to hear from the Centers for Disease Control more than the Surgeon General. Now they're starting to speak out. But, the people countered that, say, well, part of the problem is people don't trust their government. And I say, well, that's true of some. But I think most people, if we had a, more visible public health force out there, people would listen to it.
Well, I think that what you're talking about in terms of these poor neighborhoods and these parasites getting into people's system and affecting cognitive development, and what was the other one besides chaga? Was it
toxocariasis? Was the one that affects cognitive development.
And the fact that there's actual cures for these things too. I mean, that
I estimated in a paper there are 2.8 million African Americans living in poverty with toxocariasis.
Wow.
This is not a rare disease, Joe. This is a common disease.
But it's so unknown.
But it's occurring among the poor, and it's a chronic and debilitating infection. It's not dramatic. It's not Ebola. It's not killing people.
Is this mostly in warmer climates as well?
It's more common in the south than in the north.
Is it because they have longer time to stay alive?
Because the eggs are in the environment, and the worm develops within the egg.
Is there any other diseases that are going on that we don't know about?
Yeah, sure. There's a brain parasitic infection called cysticercosis.
What's that one from?
That one is from eggs, often from individuals who have a tapeworm. So we're seeing cases of that. There's some of the viruses transmitted by mosquitoes. One of the ones we don't talk about a lot, which is a very serious infection, is West Nile virus infection. That's got very high rates of not only encephalitis, but also one of our faculty members, Christy Murray, is showing very high rates of depression and other neurologic debilitation for. And that's another one we could probably use a vaccine for, but there isn't the market incentive to do it.
West Nile virus does come up, though. At least that's discussed in the news and people are aware of it.
Right,
You said it.
Right.
But there's no vaccine.
There's no vaccine, but there could be.
What is it? There could be. What's holding it back?
What's holding it back is lack of market forces, lack of financial incentive for the pharmaceutical companies to take it on.
So if there's an extremely large investment to develop something along those lines.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, vaccines are, from an investor's perspective, a tough sell because, there's a possibility. First of all, you need many years of clinical trials. It can sometimes take 2 decades from the original conception of a vaccine to actually going through clinical trials. So the hookworm vaccine I've been working on,
this was like 6 months before COVID.
Doing it.
Or maybe 7 or 8 months before COVID. In March?
Since the 1990s. So we're talking decades-long time horizons. When you talk to an investor about something with decades-long time horizons, you figure it out, right? The lights go out, very, very quickly.
That's where it gets gross, right? Because this is all we're relying on these private businesses to invest money to cure a public health issue.
That's right.
That seems kind of crazy.
Well, so in response to that, what happened was after the Ebola fiasco in 2014, where we didn't have an Ebola vaccine in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, a group of individuals came together at Davos, the World Economic Forum, and including the Gates Foundation, and they they developed this concept, or which an organization called CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, to incentivize biotechs and pharmaceutical companies to embark on diseases for which of pandemic potential, like Ebola, like Lassa fever, like MERS coronavirus infection. And that was great, but the problem is they didn't address these poverty-related diseases. So those of us who are working on poverty-related diseases are still kind of on the outside looking in.
It just seems like having everything managed by private companies that need to have some sort of a financial incentive to attack these diseases. That seems like a crazy way to deal with health crises.
That's right. And so what I've recommended is, I said that organization CEPI is great for what it's doing, but we need another mechanism. What I've proposed is that since these diseases are so common among the poor in the G20 countries, these are the 20 largest economies, to put together public sector funds for that purpose.
Public sector funds for investing in developing vaccines and treatments?
For poverty-related diseases, these chronic debilitating diseases. And in fact, we can show that working with health economists, we actually work with a terrific health economist. His name is Bruce Lee, of all names. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins.
Seems like you were changing
Yeah, right. He loves it. And he's been able to show that our vaccines are not only cost effective, they're cost savings, meaning that they're economically dominant, that they'll actually save money. The problem is doesn't help you with the fact that you still need some, but the return is on public health. You still need somebody to come along and provide that investment. So what's happened is our technical ability to develop vaccines has outstripped our financial instruments that we have to do it. So I get a stream of young people in my office wanting to go into global health. The commitment for this next generation, I know they get a lot of bad press, but my impression is this next generation, their commitment to public service is at an all-time high. And they say, Dr. Hotez, I'm all in, I'm going to go into global health. And they're a little bit disappointed when I tell them, get an MBA or get a law degree, because where we need the innovation now is in the finance sector. There must be a business model out there that would work, that would figure out how to do this. I just don't have the background to do it.
It just seems like once the momentum is in the corner of this being handled by the private sector, and that the private sector has to develop these vaccines and these treatments, and they have to do it with some sort of financial incentive. If they don't have a bucket of gold at the end of the rainbow, they're not going to take a ride.
That's right. So,
that's crazy.
It's great, but that's the reality. And so what the exciting thing about what I do is, developing these vaccines for poverty-related diseases, is there's no roadmap. Right now that we're in clinical trials, I don't know what the roadmap is to get to licensure and getting these vaccines out to the public. The terrifying thing that keeps me up at night is there's no roadmap.
Right. So it's both good and bad. There's how much does it cost to get a vaccine? I mean, in general, from developmental period to actual application.
Well, the pharmaceutical companies have traditionally said billions, but I don't think that's the case. I think one of the reasons they're doing that is because they're also recovering their R&D costs. They're putting money into R&D that they charge in order to either make a profit or at least stay even. So for instance, the cervical cancer vaccine, the HPV vaccine, that, when I last looked was $420 for the 3 doses. It doesn't cost $420 to make that vaccine. It's just that they're recovering their R&D costs, which is fair enough. So one of the things that we're proposing to do for our neglected disease vaccines is we'll delink the R&D costs. In other words, if we've gotten grants, whether it's from the Gates Foundation in the past or the NIH or the European Union or the Dutch government or the Carlos Slim Foundation, we're not going to pass those costs on. We'll just, that was used for R&D, and we would just cost for the cost of goods. So at least we can get it down to just a couple of dollars a dose, a few dollars a dose.
Okay. All right. If you are just catching up, so there is a debate that has been raging through our society on lab leak. I don't know why, but broadly, a bunch of people like Joe Rogan have been saying, oh my God, all the conspiracy theorists were right about everything. I think that they were wrong about basically everything, so I don't know how that can ever be stated. And then more specifically, related to lab leak stuff, for some reason, people seem to think that lab leak, the theory of it leaking from a lab has been increasingly validated over the past few years. But my surface level understanding was that no new information whatsoever has come out relating to, relating it all to validating that it leaked from a lab. I don't think that anything else had come out. Some people said that it did. Like some governments made statements, but there was no new scientific data. There was no new evidence presented. It was just some people just said that. In 2023, some guy called Root Claim made some alternative way, well, way earlier than this, he made some alternative way of doing debate to where he says he can weigh evidence in special ways, and he's able to determine what's real and what's not real, sometimes even better than academics can. And he gives a couple examples of this, which I don't think are real relevant. But then he stakes $100,000 that lab leak is real, and he wants to debate anybody on it who will take him up on it. And then some guy who is some autodidact, I don't think much formal educational background, decides that, hey, okay, well, I'll do it. I'll debate you on this. Peter describes himself as a physics student, programmer, and mountaineer who obsessively researches random topics. Johnny Harris has a video where he argues in favor of the lab leak theory. Oh boy, maybe we'll watch that tonight. A new video or the one 4 years ago? Has a video where he argues in favor of the lab leak theory. This one's old as fuck. But I'll probably watch a Joe Rogan thing on it because I think that's where most of this stupid information propagates from. So yesterday we watched the opening statements of these two debaters.
An outbreak usually.
This guy is a machine. The mountaineer physics student guy. He, I think, laid out an insanely compelling argument with a lot of really compelling points. Most of stuff that I had no idea about. It was just a really, really, really good opening 90-minute statement. Then the Root Claim guy does his open 90-minute statement, and it's kind of a joke. He uses a lot of very bad math, a lot of very subjective bad interpretations, a lot of very weird, kind of memey, intuitive arguments. I don't know. These were the opening statements of the two. And part two of this debate, I think, is supposed to get into more of the genetics side of things, like the actual mechanism of how did these things, like what is the actual strong, I guess, genetic evidence or medical evidence that it was either leaked from a lab or created in a lab versus of natural origin. So this is the next part of the debate. Do both of them debate in this video?
Then you go...
It sounds like, oh God, these slides, bro. Oh man. Did we confirm, is Scott Alexander the guy who's writing this here, or do other people write on his blog sometimes? Is it always him writing? It should be, right? I believe he wrote this one. Unless they did otherwise. Okay, I'm assuming it's him then. I'm curious how he summarized his the first few videos. 2, 3. He went up to the third one here, so I guess we should watch the third one and then I'll... Well, good luck.
So how is this going to work? You're gonna manually switch the chess clock for us every time we... So, okay.
The chess clock?
And we're starting with your questions? What was it?
Oh, they're doing questions. Oh, it's a Q&A back and forth. Oh, shit. Okay.
Decision.
I think we were I was going to say some things in the rebuttal, and I'm not planning to talk forever. I was going to do the 5 minutes or less. I don't know. Are we okay with that? Or do we want the judges to go first? Okay. Yeah, so I want to start with Shinfati Market, because we're in disagreement on that, and that's just one of the last things you were talking about. It sounded like you were saying that's like community transmission that shows up in a market. Is that correct, sir?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So one of the big problems here, I actually really like this debate because it exemplifies, like this, one of the things that I say constantly is I'm going to say a whole bunch of things that are red flags that if I hear somebody else say them, I'm assuming they're bullshitting 99% of the time. We're like, oh, do your own research and, you know, be critical of news sources and try to be skeptical of things equal. Like, generally when people say any of that shit, they're full of shit. And I love this debate because this guy at the bottom says all of the right things and then does all the wrong things. And this guy at the top doesn't say any of the initial shit he does, but he does all of the right things. Like, I hope you try to be like this guy up top. And the guy on the bottom is like kind of like Tim Pool's basically, like try to be rational and reasonable and then just engage in the most ridiculous form of thought possible.
We're saying that the market was the next major cluster since lockdown.
Yeah, but like, do you think it's in Beijing? Do you think the virus is going around Beijing among people, but then it shows up at the market because markets are a likely place for outbreaks to start?
So probably.
I paused for a second because it's funny that one of the other criticisms that I give I've said this a lot for the video essay people is it feels like sometimes if somebody makes a 10-minute video they've said every single thing they know about the particular topic. This guy, based on his responses to the judges' questions, he seems pretty fluent in the material. Like when they had questions about the material, he was able to justify the assertions with underlying facts. Like he was familiar with the research that he was citing. He was familiar with the sources he was citing. The guy on the bottom wasn't able to articulate anything concerning the slides that he had. It almost seemed like he didn't even prepare the presentation, you know?
A few people got infected, and when it got to the market, amplification was faster.
Okay. Because do you think it's in Beijing? Do you think the virus is going around Beijing among people, but then it shows up at the market because markets are a likely place for outbreaks to start?
So probably a few people got infected, and when it got to the market, amplification was faster.
This is a dead in the water argument immediately, and I already know it from the first slides that this guy showed. So his argument in the prior thing was, oh, the reason why some early cases show up at the market is because the market is the most likely place for viruses to transmit. Bullshit. It would definitely be places like malls and stuff. There are places where the amount of humans that are there, the density of the humans that are there, and then the diversification, people from different parts of society that are going to be way, 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 way higher than wet markets where these foods are bought. I have no idea how he's going to survive. My guess is that's what the top guy is going to argue. If we look at population density for well-traveled areas, there's no reason to think that the wet market would just be the first place that this would show up at. It would definitely be other places first. But
okay. So I actually hadn't read that much about this until I saw your slide. So I read a bunch of papers about this weekend. And it was traced to...
Oh, until I saw your slide. So their research was available to the other person. That's so bewildering to me. It makes sense for the top guy because I feel like the top guy's slides already responded to everything the bottom guy said, but it feels like the bottom guy his slides were almost like he was going first. Like they weren't responsive at all to anything from Top Guy's stuff. So I wonder if he just didn't change it or anything, but okay. Oof. Okay, well.
I saw your slide, so I read a bunch of papers about this weekend. And it was traced to seafood at the market. It was traced to imported seafood in one stall. And then when it got out of the market, the cases clustered on the market. And when you do statistical centering techniques, you get, this is not exactly the same kernel density estimate that they did in Warby, but you get the same result that the outside cases cluster on the market. So we only have 2 data points now. It's Huanan and Shinfati, but they show the same patterns, that you get some animal product that comes into a market and it spreads outside in similar ways. And you get clustering within the market. It's a little better in Shinfati. You know, it's a really nice heat map on the stall that the infected seafood was traced to, and all that imported salmon tested positive. But you do have additional hotspots, so it's not 100% clear. There's some papers that judges can read about the infected salmon. And you gave some numbers about, like, there's more cases in Shinfati, and the ratio is higher. I looked it up. Shinfati is the biggest market in Beijing, and actually all of Asia. It's 21 times larger than the Huanan market. It's got 20 times as many visitors, assuming the 10,000 number you said, it's 200,000 visitors there. Also, they shut it down really fast. I think the cases were detected June 11th. They closed the market 2 days later. They shut the schools. They canceled flights. So the ratio is going to be higher because you detected a lot more market-linked cases when you shut down the outbreak really fast. So I don't think that proves what you're saying. I think it actually is a really great similarity to the Huanan seafood market. But just in general, I wanted to talk about probabilistic arguments. And I think it's funny that you came up with it's like 1 in 100,000 against zoonosis, and I came up with it's like 60 billion in favor of zoonosis. And what we both did is we just multiplied numbers together. So there's still human bias here, which is you decide which numbers you multiply together. And there's a huge possibility for confirmation bias there.
Yes. Thank you for bringing this up. Yeah, the illusion of using some Bayesian probabilistic calculation, like you've removed human subjectivity when the most important part is picking which numbers you're calculating on, right? The calculations are simple, and that's the easy part, you know?
Where you get attached to one theory and you only pick the numbers for that theory.
Sorry, when you said that the bottom guy says the right thing, do you mean he's better at speaking or saying things that sound good? I mean that he's good at saying, like, don't fall for the sharpshooter fallacy. Don't fall for the preconceived bias fallacy. Don't fall, like he says those things, but then he doesn't follow through with it. He doesn't actually not fall for those things.
For confirmation bias there, where you get attached to one theory and you only pick the numbers for that theory. I don't know how we resolve this when we have 2 completely different probabilistic estimates. I think what we need to do is fact-checking to figure out which numbers are important. And I think your presentation showed why the root claim might be going in the wrong direction here, is you don't do fact-checking, and there's a bunch of cases where you messed up here. You said that this December 8th case happened before the market outbreak. Both sides of the debate disagree with that. You got the 2 visitors wrong. You're focused on these early Weibo cases when there really aren't many or maybe any of those in December. You said Warby's data is confounded by population density. You have some theory for why the case search was biased, because it was before January 18th, but actually the cases were found after January 18th, so that there could be some source of bias, but it's not that. And you ignored the early case search where it should be unbiased because it hadn't been identified yet. The excess days, you said something about 90 missing early cases. I can talk about why that's not true. You've also said it's irrelevant.
Now remember, this is back and forth, so I'm sure that the bottom guy is going to have a bunch of facts that the other guy wasn't true about, you know? I'm sure.
COVID started, and I don't think that's true. I mean, when you want to...
Sorry, Peter, can you go back to the previous slide?
This one? Yeah.
The one where you were making claims about fact-checking. I just hadn't finished reading.
Oh, this one, yeah, sorry.
No, yeah, that one, thank you. Retrospective. Okay, I'm going to be interested to hear what Sarah has to say about this. Thank you.
I think these are the kind of facts that we need to go over, because we can't do a probabilistic argument until we know what the right facts are. We need to know which facts to put numbers onto. We can't just start.
How did he prepare a rebuttal presentation in advance? I'm not sure now, because I thought at the end of the last video, didn't they say, can we take a 10-minute break? But now it seems like maybe they actually had a weekend to go over the other things or respond. Does anybody know for sure?
Likely to notice.
But I'd like to know.
I have it in front of me. Yes. So market. Yeah. So it's 0.5 for 0.5 for market on the low.
I see. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that. Sorry. Excellent. We'll take another 7-minute break and then begin the rebuttals.
Maybe 10.
10-minute break. Yeah. No. So they had to have prepared this in advance, right? So.
The numbers. And I think when it started is actually really important, because you want to know where and when. Those were like the 2 key questions I started looking at when I was trying to figure this out. And there's a lot of little things like the December 8th case that you missed. But then 2 slides later, you're talking about Mr. Chen on December 16th. That's the same guy, but you didn't notice that you've double labeled the same case. As far as I could tell, that might have just been misspeaking.
Yeah, it looked like even when I was looking at the guy's slides, it looked like he hadn't prepared the data himself because he was misstating even what was on some of the slides, or it didn't seem like he understood what he was showing sometimes.
You talked about this Texas sharpshooter fallacy, and I think this is actually a great metaphor, but I think this also applies to the Mahjong room, to the toilets theory, to a lot of these things, to this Weibo data, where you describe this as unbiased, and I think there's a bias you're missing, which is that you got to have like 20 different ways you can mount the data in Wuhan, and most of them are going to say north side of the river, but you're going to find one that says south side of the river, and the people who are doing motivated reasoning are going to latch onto the one that says south side. That's where the bias comes in. When you actually look at that data, it's from February. It's people putting the dates in retrospectively. 3 entered December. That's kind of weird. That could just be old people fat fingering the date. We don't know which of these 3 points are from December. It could be the 3 points right there. I tried to find a copy of that data. I couldn't even find December points in it. I only found January.
This is something that's not talked about much, but the mistakes in data entry are actually a thing that people that do broad stats have to account for. There was a really interesting way that this showed up in the 2016 election, I think, where there was this quote unquote study that claimed that there was widespread voter fraud because like 3 million illegals voted. And there was this, I don't remember if Cambridge or Harvard or somebody did a response to this. Somebody maybe can find it. But there was an interesting statistics thing. I don't know what I think there's a formal name for this fallacy basically. But basically what happens is let's say that you survey 2 groups of people. They surveyed legal immigrants and then people who might be illegal immigrants, or citizens or people here illegally, right? Now, when you survey these 2 groups of people, you run into a strange issue where there is a huge group in the first category, and there's probably a very, very small group in the second category. I'll say 1,000 even. And then you survey and you ask them, did you vote in the last election? Okay. Now, one thing that happens when you do surveys is you have to account for some kind of error when people fill out a thing. They might check the wrong box. They would just don't read the question right. It's just stupid or whatever, right? I don't know what standard surveyors account for, if it's 1% or 2% of responses or some percentage of responses. But something that happens here is if you have these 1 million people who are citizens, if they make a mistake, we'll say a small percentage of them, we'll say 0.1% of these people accidentally mark on the thing that they're undocumented or that they're not a citizen, and then they go on to say that they did vote, because the size of these 2 groups is so disproportionate, a very small identification error here will double the size of this population over here when you go to do this survey. So of these 1 million people who are all citizens, maybe 0.1% fuck up the form, or they mismark something. They say, oh, I'm not a citizen or whatever. They fuck it up and they say, yeah, I did go on to vote. Well, that 0.1% of people who made that mistake are the size of your entire cohort over here. And then on this side, well, let's say 0.1% of them fuck up their data entry. That's literally just one person who misidentifies themselves as a citizen. There was an early study in 2017, I think, that said that 3 million illegal citizens voted, or I'm sorry, not citizens, 3 million illegal immigrants voted. That's what this study did. It did it by survey, and then I believe it was, I think it might have been Harvard that did the response saying this is the statistical error that this survey didn't account for, and is most likely the explanation for how 50% of illegal immigrants said that they voted in a federal election on a survey that was given out. It's much more likely that this is what happened. Oh shit, was it Harvard? We are professional political scientists who are to clarify the evidence in our field for President Trump's claim, which he's repeated several times, that millions of non-citizens voted in the 2016 presidential election. The president has cited a 2014 article by Jesse Richman, Gulshan Chattah, and David Ernest, published in their peer-reviewed journal Electoral Studies as evidence for this claim. In that study, Richman and his colleagues used data from the 2008-2010 iterations of the Cooperative Congressional Election Study, a large-scale regular survey that contained more than 30,000 and 55,000 respondents, respectively. The researchers leveraged questions about respondent citizenship status and voting to argue that between 7.9% and 14.7% of non-citizens voted in 2008. Given the non-citizen population of about 19.4 million, the authors concluded the number of non-citizen voters could range from just over 38,000 at the very minimum to nearly 2.8 million at the maximum. The higher bound in this statement is the one that appears to have shaped the president's rhetoric on this issue. Funnily enough, I think you could probably consider this to be part of a sharpshooter fallacy. For instance, if you want to study something incredibly specific about a certain cohort, you would probably be very careful about how you poll around that particular question. Whereas if you just have a broad set of data that you collect about a cohort and somebody wants to come in and ask very specific questions, well, depending on the question, you might be able to torture or pull out whatever you want from that study because that's not even what that survey was initially even trying to ask. So for instance, if we were actually surveying people to figure out who voted and who didn't vote in an election, who was an undocumented citizen, an undocumented person versus like an actual citizen, you would probably either identify via like Social Security or something, or you would ask more specific questions or more questions about it in order to audit your data set to make sure that you don't have any of these errors. But my guess is in these initial surveys, the cooperative congressional election study, they probably weren't hyper-fixated on that particular question, so they probably didn't hyper-fixate on validating the data in that sense. So pulling this information from the survey is probably not an appropriate thing to do. The analysis in this paper has been shown to be incorrect. In a survey as large as the CCES, even a small rate of response error, where people incorrectly mark the wrong item on a survey, can lead to incorrect conclusions. Importantly, the findings in Richmond et al. Rest on a sample of only 339 respondents who claimed to be non-citizens in 2008 out of about 30,000 CCES respondents. Stephen Ancelobio here, Samantha Lux, and Brian Schaffner demonstrated in a 2015 paper that response error explains nearly all of the supposed non-citizens in Richmond et al. Sample who voted. The underlying intuition is relatively straightforward. Given the dynamics of the CCES, a very large overall sample with a very small subpopulation of non-citizens, even with a very low error rate of 0.1%, we would expect roughly 10% of the people in the non-citizen category would actually be citizens. If those people then voted at a higher rate, it would appear as if a low but consequential percentage of non-citizens were voting, which is precisely the result Richmond et al. Describe. Indeed, Anspalola and colleagues will leverage a key feature of the CCES to investigate this possibility. When they examined the responses from people who were asked the citizenship question at 2 different points in time, they found inconsistencies. Oh, so the survey actually did check for that. These people just didn't incorporate it into their, into their study. The citizenship status of 56 respondents changed in 2 years, and 20 people reported moving from citizen to non-citizen status, which is not even a plausible change. Of those, who we can be more confident are non-citizens, there was not a single voter in 2010. In 2012, there was just one person who may have voted, but even in that case, the evidence suggested the respondent was actually not a voter. Thus, we believe that the findings in Richmond et al. Are driven by measurement error in the CCES and do not accurately reflect the rates of non-citizen voting in the United States. Nobody talks about this anymore, but Trump put together some like election or illegal immigrant voting commission in Congress to try to figure out if illegals were voting, because he kept claiming 3 million illegals voted over and over again, and that source came from this bullshit study. And also the board that he put together found fuck all. They didn't find anything to prove that his claim anyway. So, but that's, that was that data anomaly there.